Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Christian Meisner. Christian is the Senior Vice President and CHRO for Kaiser Foundation Health Plan, and reports directly to the CEO and is a member of the National Executive Team. Previously, he was the Vice President of Talent and Integration for United Technologies Corporation, and prior to that, he was the CHRO of Otis Elevator Company. Christian, thank you very much for coming to join us here. We really appreciate having you on campus.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
So, in recent years in particular, HR seems to have really moved from, I think it's been a long time now that HR has had a seat at the table, right? That's getting kind of old, but sure. Now seems to be center stage, particularly due to COVID and the George Floyd incident. Do you agree with that, and is that sustainable?
Yeah, I really do. You know, it's interesting when I think about really good HR, and when I talk to my team about three things that I think we really need to be known for and focused on. I think of being talent obsessed, everything about talent, the way you attract talent, develop talent, reward talent. Everyone in HR should be having a piece of that agenda and focused on it. I also think being culture and change stewards. We have a unique position in the organization because of what we do to not own those things, but to help shepherd and steward that. And third, I think about being expert and efficient. Right? We need to be expert in something, a discipline of HR or human resources overall. And we owe it to the organization, since we are a cost center, to be efficient at what we do. And so talent obsessed, culture and change stewards, and expert and efficient. And to answer your question, if you think about what HR is being asked to do, certainly traditionally and now in today's environment, to be talent obsessed and culture and change stewards, I think the answer is yes, you can be, but you need to have the modern operating model, right? And be able to draw on the centers of expertise and the HR operations so that the people at the point of impact, HR leaders on the ground with the customers, are able to focus on that talent and culture and change agenda. If you have them weighted down with HR transactions and other things, right, the model doesn't work so well. And so to answer your sustainable question is, if you're in that model, then I think it is sustainable, and I think it's a great opportunity for the function to drive even greater impact.
So it's really a lot to unpack there, but let's start with this. What do you mean by this HR model?
I think about, my term would be a modern operating model that many companies have gone to, frankly, probably a decade or so ago. But this idea of having centers of expertise, deep functional experts in compensation, in labor relations, if you have labor, in talent development. So as a group of deep subject matter experts that the team can draw on. You then have sort of centralized your HR operations, your HR transactions, things that need to happen, and you leverage technology, common process to expedite that and do that in an excellent way, which leads you with often a smaller HR business partner or HR generalist population, but one that is much deeper and has the ability of not having to worry about the HR transactions. They're being done really, really well. But then drawing on the expertise of your COEs to be that senior HR advisor. And that to me is sort of the more modern operating model that many companies are in various phases of either getting to or already in or just starting that journey.
That's really interesting because that sounds like, to the probably uninitiated, that you're suggesting that your HR business partners don't do the things that many people would have thought of as HR.
That's exactly right. In fact, one of the biggest challenges of the transition into a modern operating model, if you will, is the HR generalists, who, to your point, grew up probably doing benefit transactions or comp transactions or those types of things locally as part of their agenda. Letting that go and trusting that others are going to be better positioned in the model to do that on your behalf and your customer's behalf. And then frankly, upgrading and upskilling that population to do those things that can only be done on the ground at elbows with the customer. You can't own the talent agenda for that part of your division sitting in headquarters 1,000 miles away. You just can't. Right? You can't own culture. You can't own the EID, the equity, inclusion, diversity agenda locally from afar. And so upskilling and redefining that HR generalist role is usually the hardest part of moving a big organization, or I guess any organization, into that model.
And can you just describe a little bit about how or why creating this model and really upscaling those HR generalists at that role of business partners, how that really helps translate and drive business success?
Sure. If you think about, kind of what is HR, the HR function really asked to do on behalf of the organization, right? It's back to that talent obsessed. It is the attraction of talent. It is the engagement of talent and the culture in which you wrap around your organization and your employees. And so again, that is the biggest opportunity. It's what often the organization needs the most and is asking, especially in times of great change, of which we're in, and great stress. And the Great Resignation, all of that requires really world-class HR work on the ground with the customers.
And you mentioned one of the issues of having those really great HR business partners. One of the many things that they can really help steer at that local level is diversity and inclusion. I know we actually spoken a little bit about that. Can you describe why that's important for your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first it's tied to the whole DNA of the company. If you look at the history of Kaiser Permanente and where we started 75 plus years ago, you'll see things like care wards that were integrated, right? When you think about the 1950s in the US, that wasn't the case in a lot of our institutions. That's where we started. And so we have a rich legacy of it being in our DNA. Second piece is we enjoy, I would say, pretty good diversity in our organization today. Close to 50% of our executive population are women. Over a third are people of color. And actually, if you look at the C-suites of the CEO's direct reports, those numbers are actually higher. So I'd say first we come from, a solid foundation in history. But when we think about EID or DEI, I think of it through three lenses. First, our employees. And our fundamental belief is every employee should have the equal right to fulfill and attain their ultimate potential, whatever that is and however they define it, an equal right. Through the lens of the organization, through Kaiser Permanente, we want to have the best talent on the planet, period. Not in healthcare, not in the United States, on the planet. And you cannot, right, if you are not equally accessing all the talent. And so there's a huge compelling piece for the organization. And then finally, for our communities and members, if you think about what we do as an organization, right, we deliver health care at the bedside. And if you think about that relationship with your customer, if you will, compared to other industries, you're often seeing that individual at one of the most vulnerable moments in their life. They're getting a test back, or they're going to have to take a test, or there's something serious happening in their life. And what all the research shows, as well as just a lot of common sense, is if you've got a person who you can relate to, who might look like you or share experiences or background, that experience is going to be much more impactful and it's going to be a better experience. And so for us to ultimately deliver on our mission, having a diverse organization that reflects the communities we serve is absolutely essential. And so whether it's our history, whether it's through the eyes of our employee, the organization, or our members, I think that the opportunity and the obligation to be world-class in this area is a no-brainer to us.
And I think closely related, Kaiser Permanente talks a lot about ESG and a broad set of stakeholders from the organization level. Can you describe a few things that you do to make kind of maybe what that even means for you and some things you do to make that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it's one of the big things that actually drew me to Kaiser Permanente is that when we talk about health, we obviously talk about the physical health and all of its manifestations, and that makes sense, and certainly mental health, particularly now with all the needs. But what I really found interesting is KP will then often go beyond that and say, but we got to think about total health, meaning financial, food, housing, and the whole philosophy is, if you're familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy, if you will, right? This is applied to kind of a healthy life, which is you're not going to be too good at managing your prediabetes condition or your high blood pressure if you're worried about having a roof over your head, where the next meal is going to come from, or if you're exposed to gun violence on a regular basis. And so the definition of total health from a community perspective I thought was very powerful. And what's great about the organization is then it's one thing to think that way. We then put our money where our mouth is. And so from an ESG perspective, we've spent, for instance, $185 million in the last number of years on affordable housing. So it's not just saying it's important and putting into your health model. It's spending upwards of $200 million, and we're going to be going beyond that in the next couple of years and we've produced over 10,000 affordable homes for people in our communities. We look at food, and we've created a very innovative approach to, we know a lot about our members. We know where they live, we know what their income levels are, we also know a lot about their health needs, nutritional needs, and we were able to connect low-income members with food subsidy programs in their region. And so we've connected now over $100 million of food subsidies to our members in those areas of need. And so it's taking that ESG agenda beyond kind of the traditional environmental pieces that you might see. And oh, by the way, we do pretty well there. We just spent $3 billion with a B with diverse suppliers in 2021, and that was a huge increase in that focus there. And then on the environmental side, we have over 7 million square feet of LEED certified square footage in our facilities, which is, I think, by and far the most in our industry. And so from both a traditional ESG perspective, adding, of course, the equity, inclusion, diversity agenda we spoke about, but then that kind of total health element around food and shelter, I think is a pretty powerful combination.
So this next question is a little loaded, I think, but you're sitting in a Platinum LEED certified building, so we appreciate that.
I
for
saw
sure.
the plaque.
And it's clear that the ESG, all the things you described must be extremely attractive for customers and employees for sure. But we hear a lot of people in the political realm, et cetera, talking about how somehow companies that invest in ESG are in some way hurting shareholders, kind of going back to a 1960s model of what the organization is about. Can you describe and share why the things you're doing are actually benefiting the organization overall?
Yeah, sure. Well, and I should have stipulated up front, we're not for profit, so that is a big leg up on not worrying about a quarterly earnings call or stock appreciation, which I respect a lot of companies do need to worry about. But still, when we go back to our mission, which is delivering healthcare for the communities we serve, our belief is keeping them healthy. It's part of our whole integrated model, which is a belief of if you can keep people healthy and actually deliver health care, not sick care, right? We don't see them when they're sick. We actually spend time preventing illness and getting up ahead of the stream. It's better for the individual, for sure. It's better for us from an outcome perspective and financially. And so it's a good model. We've proven it now empirically within the confines of healthcare. And I think our belief is if you take that out a concentric circle or two and wrap in these other elements that we know influence overall health, that the same kind of value proposition plays out over the long term.
And changing gears a little bit, but I've heard you talk about decision making, particularly using data analytics and the importance of that. Can you describe why that's so essential in an HR function where historically people maybe had not gone down that deep enough?
We've got about 220,000 employees, and so we'll just start with kind of the economics since we just came off of that. If you look at the cost of employing the wages and the benefits, it is a huge piece of the overall financial performance of the organization. And so any big element of your business, right, you want to have as many insights into as possible. People are also really complex, as we know, hence the whole need for an HR function. And so the ability of trending data and really having insights into your organization, into the people in your organization, can be incredibly powerful, especially as you get into more predictive parts of analytics. And so, full disclosure, we just went live, as I shared with you earlier, with a brand new HR system. And so we're seeing some learning curves, I would say, but as we lead towards more predictive analytics in the future. I would say one interesting example where it's working quite well is in our employee engagement platform. We've got a really deep, 2 times a year employee survey with a very deep analytical engine, algorithmic engine underneath it that allows us to actually look at both outcome questions, things you want to see in your workforce, but then those elements that actually are the statistical drivers. And so we're able to apply the analytics that says if you want to drive retention, which is what a lot of companies are interested in, we actually can isolate the 3 or 4 most important elements within the survey, and you action plan on those. And then we can drill, and that's a different answer within different parts of the organization. So you can get a really nice fine tooth comb, if you will, as to what are those levers you can pull locally to drive engagement.
And your 220,000 associates were sincerely saving lives throughout COVID and keeping us moving as a country along with the other health professionals. But there's of course been a massive burden on these health professionals. And if we think about like a group like nurses, where we know that there's been amazing shortages and they've been overworked and burdened, et cetera, what are some of the things that you're doing to make it more feasible for them to work well in the organization?
Yeah, look, it's a huge question that we're wrestling with now, and I would say I think it's of course it's not one thing, it's many things. And one thing I would say is I think we started off on the right foot. Our guiding principle was do the right thing. And so early in the pandemic, we delivered and designed and delivered benefits around childcare, around COVID leave before it was required, by many states. We put care delivery folks up in hotels when they were traveling, all just to surge resources to them. We spent upwards of $500 million on those benefits because it was the right thing to do for our people who are doing the right thing for the community. And so just starting off on that foot, we followed that up with thank you recognition bonuses in 2020 and 2021, just again to reinforce that. And then what we've done is designed and curated a program called Rise and Renew, which is a series of programs and policies and resources for employees, all employees, but really designed around care delivery. Everything from different apps to help them all the way into, we have an in-house EAP system and team up towards to true mental health support and everything in between that they can access. And then the last piece that we're really just starting on is taking this idea of flexibility that many of us have enjoyed on the business or administrative side, and how do you apply that in a clinical setting? Obviously, working remotely 5 days from your basement probably doesn't work, but so if that doesn't work, you can't just say that there's no such thing. And so we're starting to engage our workforce, our labor partners to understand how does this concept of flexibility fit into the care delivery setting, using technology and some things. And I think you have to answer that question. Others are going to. And so we've started that journey. And to me, that'll be one of the missing puzzle pieces that we need to find.
So on that topic of flexibility and remote work in general, there are a lot of challenges that seem to come up with that. One of them being, your company obviously has a great culture, but how do you keep that culture going when you have such a big remote workforce?
Yeah. It's something that I'm not sure we've answered the question yet. We've been, like many, working in a hybrid environment with a large portion, about 40,000 of our employees have been working fully remotely. We'll bring back a portion of those in some sort of flex environment come in the beginning of the year in January, and then a smaller portion will come back full time. It's a double-edged sword, right? We know that a lot of our employees really enjoy it. We actually see increased productivity in some areas, no time commuting, and it's very helpful for employees. But I do worry about, especially for the remote workforce, how do you keep that engagement? And how do you, as you hire and onboard people who've never stepped foot into a facility and been around a team, how do you inject that great culture that has really served us well over the years? And so we've done things around for remote, both employees and leaders, training that they go through that talks about things you have to, especially as a leader, consciously do on a Zoom call or a Teams call to make sure you're inclusive, to make sure that you are engaging with your employees. How in your one-on-ones do you ask about them personally? Things that often come up naturally, face-to-face, before a meeting, or grabbing a cup of coffee. You have to purposely insert those into your remote digital experiences to keep that connection.
So really much more intentionality.
Absolutely, yeah. It has to be right on the forefront.
Yeah, it's something I'm not particularly good at, I have to say, when it comes to remote work in particular, but maybe other places. So kind of going back just to the nursing challenges, et cetera, part of what you described, you'd mentioned even this, the idea of the great resignation sort of thing. And that seems like something we hear even more when it comes to the healthcare professionals. So what can organizations do to reduce that? And I know you all actually have remarkably low turnover compared to many organizations. So what are some of the things you do to make that happen? Yeah,
interestingly, one of the biggest things you can do is fully staff your organization, right? And so the thing that we hear now, it's a vicious cycle, right? You're short staffed because of the great resignation, and of course for us, the demand for healthcare has spiked and continues to be high. If you're not fully staffed, of course that lands more heavily on the people who are there, which which will only usually accelerate attrition. So one is we've had a huge focus on staffing, care delivery staffing, nurse staffing in particular, and really I would say broke some plate glass and reimagining full life cycle from the day that job opens to the day the replacement shows up. And we've made some huge accelerations, and we're actually seeing the attrition curve start to bend back.
It's a really interesting perspective to talk about how the way to prevent lots of turnover is to make sure you have enough people doing all the jobs to begin with. You've been a CHRO in 3 different industries, really. Can you describe just briefly what's different about walking in as the leader in across different industries?
Sure. I mean, I think it's when you think about, at least when I think about human resources and what is it we're focusing on, clearly you can break the function into its logical sub-functions and you can have your initiatives. I've always felt the most important thing to do is kind of tilt the function on its ear and look at the business strategies and extract the people, organizational capabilities that are needed to drive those business results. And so one of the biggest challenges, at least I've now had, shifting into a purely service organization, is really pivoting around and understanding what are those business drivers across an organization like that is an integrated healthcare. So you have both the health insurance side and its business drivers, and then the care delivery side. And how do you have an overarching HR strategy that understands both, is nuanced enough to hit both needs, but also leverages scale of a $93 billion organization. And finding that right balance point in a very dynamic time frame has been a little bit of a challenge, but part of the fun as well.
And here at the Center for Executive Succession, we spend a lot of time thinking about CEO succession and the role that CHROs play in developing the whole entire process of CEO succession. But can you talk a little bit about what it means and what the CHRO's role may be in terms of succession at other C-suite roles, like CFO, for instance?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, we just did a pretty large redesign of our succession process. So it's kind of fresh on my mind. What we started is really beginning with the expectation that succession and having a deep, diverse succession pool is a business outcome no different than cash flow, revenue, sales, and that it is a leadership accountability. Yes, HR is there and maybe first amongst equals, but this is a business responsibility in setting that expectation. I then think the CHRO and the HR function is really important around what are the principles, how do we want to think about succession? There's a lot of different ways, and so you'll hear a lot of people talk about risk-taking on talent and transparency and equity and taking those, and we actually designed 5 principles that we debated deeply with management because they're going to co-own this. So this was going to need to be really important. And then from there, we actually worked the process. And so if you look at kind of the way succession happens, the common language on talent we've been able to develop, what is a hypo, what isn't, right? All of that you can lead and stitch right up into our principles that we established. And it drives, I think, a really good common view of talent. And that is a really important role that I play, I think, in keeping everyone honest and calling it out and calling my peers out if needed. We're saying, well, wait a second, that's not what we talked about, right? And we're not taking a risk here. We're ready, we're ready to take a calculated risk on this high potential talent. Let's do it and understand what support she or he needs at that next level. And so taking those principles, putting them into the process, and then bringing it to life and making that talent conversation not a once a year thing. We actually embedded in our CEO staff meeting once a month. We're always talking about talent, and it's on the agenda. And so those are some things that I think the CHRO and the HR team can drive.
Super. And Christian, it has really been delightful for me to get a chance to speak with you. Thank you very much for visiting us here. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Enjoyed the time. Thanks.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today, Christian Meisner of Kaiser Foundation Health Plan shared his views regarding the role of HR as a strategic partner in driving business success in the healthcare industry. He also shared his thoughts about how the CHRO's role must involve strong communications with the executive leadership team to provide them with unique insight regarding a number of issues, including talent, succession, organizational culture, and diversity and inclusion responsibilities. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.